Once we figure out what our process design is going to be, recall the 4 types of process designs: job shop, batch, repetitive, and continuous. Once you figure out which one of those you're going to do, then you need to outline what that process is in more detail. So we need to conceptualize the design, and we need to build a process flow diagram. This process flow diagram is going to show where we make decisions, where we are doing something, so the steps in our process, where we are pulling materials from somewhere else, so maybe you have some raw materials in storage you need to make your product, or where you have input that needs to come from somewhere else. So when we build a process flow diagram, we have symbols that represent each of those things. So when you build a process flow diagram, you're going to start with a circle to indicate that this is the beginning of the process. Whenever there's an activity, you're going to represent that activity with a square. And then if there's a decision that has to be made, you're going to show that with a diamond. All right, so let's assume we make a decision and now we have some additional actions to take. If we need to pull material from storage in order to do that activity, like here in the example below, you see they're pulling flour, salt, and yeast from storage in order to mix and turn into dough. So we could do some additional activities. Anytime we have a decision, of course, we have a diamond. If there's information that needs to come from someone else in order to make that decision, then we can create a parallelogram. So basically, we're taking a rectangle and we're just kind of pushing it over on its side a bit. A parallelogram is when there is input from an external party. So if you need boss's approval before you can move on to the next step, if you need your supplier to provide you with some information, then we would use a parallelogram to do so. And so that becomes part of our process flow again, and then we end it with a circle when we're done. So it indicates where we start and where we end, and whether something is a decision, an action, or if it's an input. And we separate inputs as a material input is a diamond, or is a triangle, and a parallelogram for informational input. In class, you're going to build some process flow diagrams so you can practice these steps. When we look at process flow diagrams, there are a couple other things we can add to it. One is a potential failure point. This shows where the process is most at risk. So usually it's near decisions, maybe it's near an activity that is particularly risky, but where it might impact the success of the process. So if we're making a good, where might the quality of the good be at risk? If we're providing a service, where might customers' perceptions or happiness be at risk? So you can identify those points that are very critical in your production process because they impact overall the success or failure of it. The other thing you can do with process flow diagrams like we see here is you can actually outline in the process flow diagram who is doing what. So in this case, we have service department, performance department, and we can separate out who's doing what. You can do it this way like we're seeing here on the chart, but it can also be done where party 1, party 2 are essentially in rows, and so then maybe the job after a certain decision gets made gets passed on to the next people, and we can show that here by essentially putting in rows the different groups and showing with our process flow diagram who does what. If you have a particular project where you are delegating, so maybe part of this is now going here, it's possible that your process flow diagram will split and join back up again as you delegate some of the work. Well, these are process flow diagrams. They essentially show the steps in the process where decisions are made, where our production is at risk. There's also what is called value stream mapping. And value stream mapping takes your process flow and it takes it to another level. And it does so by adding the information flow and by adding your material flow. So what you see in this example is a value stream map for making lemonade. Now in your top left corner, these are going to be your suppliers, and the top right corner, that's going to be your customers. So the images you see here, these boxes that have kind of raised triangles out of them, they indicate where you're getting your materials from and where your final product is going to. In the center here, we have production control. This is whoever's responsible for this process. So this might be a person, this might be a department. Then what you see up on the top is you see arrows that connect in between the customer, the supplier, and your production control. So this is the flow of information. In this case here, what we have is that we have the lemonade drinkers communicating to our production that they want lemonade, and then us communicating to the supplier that we need lemons. With a value stream map, we can tell you whether or not that information is being shared electronically or whether it's being communicated manually, a conversation or paper. So if you have a zigzag in your arrow, it's electronic information, and if it is just a straight line, then it is more manual information flow. What you have in the center here is going to be what was originally your process flow diagram. Now there's some more information added to your process flow diagram. So what you see here in these boxes, this information, when we're looking at that, what we're talking about here is related to our production process. So we're looking at our capacity, we're looking at our what we call talk time or cycle time, and we're going to talk about all those things later. So for right now, if you're creating a value stream map, you can leave this information off, but that's going to be related to your actual production. Okay, so we'll figure out how to calculate those later when we do that. What you see here though in the squares, these are the different steps in the process. The arrow that you see going in between shows you that you're moving your work in process or your inventory in between. You'll see little symbols here in the bottom left. Later on this semester, we're going to talk about material requirement planning and the just-in-time process. So whether you're using a push or a pull inventory management system, that's what that's indicating there. So for now, we'll leave those kind of things off until we look at inventory management. The key here is that as we look at this production process, it tells you how much inventory is moving through. And then at the bottom, you see a timeline for how long it takes to do these different activities. So the original process flow diagram didn't include information about the amount of inventory. It didn't include information about information flow. It also didn't include the timeline here. So if you're creating a value stream map, you want to add in your timeline, your information flow, and information about the amount of inventory or work in process that's moving in between. There are some general images or symbols you can use on your value stream map. As we said before, the box that has little triangles on top, on the right is the customer, the left is the supplier. That center box is going to be who's primarily responsible. A box with a line and typically some words here tell you what the activity is. We can look at how information is shared, right? We talked about the line that has the bends in it versus straight. Your information flow will show up in your process flow, and so we denote that movement of your inventory or work in process with your a dashed arrow. And then here you can see the movement of raw materials or finished goods with more of a solid gray arrow. And if I go back, where you see that here is you'll notice that this arrow here shows that our lemon company is shipping, and that truck there shows that we outsource the transportation. So if logistics is being done by someone other than our company, we can signify that with the truck. Somebody else is bringing us the materials, or maybe we've outsourced to DHL or some other logistics company, then we have the truck there. So it's showing that we have raw materials coming from our supplier, and you can see that that's 1,500 units. You can also see a grayed arrow over here by the lemon drinkers, and that's the final product. So arrows that are solid in gray indicate that it's either raw materials or finished product, whereas the arrows that are dashed here indicate that it's inventory or work in process. So we've done something to the raw materials, but it's not yet the finished good. Inventory we denote with a triangle here. And so just like you saw in the process flow diagram where the triangle indicated that materials were coming from storage, we see that same shape here with the triangle where it's inventory that's being brought in. And then that work in process is moving through. So again, we have that material that's being stored. Value stream maps can get a lot more complicated. You'll see symbols like these here. So as we start to talk about the just-in-time and process, the material requirement process, we can add in some of those symbols to indicate whether it's a push or a pull inventory management system. We can, when we start to use Kanban cards, which come from just-in-time, we'll have symbols for that, as well as when we pull things from storage, it's going to have different symbols depending on how we manage the inventory. So you can see in this example, there's some additional symbols or signs on these that are related to inventory management, and we'll talk about that later this semester.